My name's Tim Wilson. I am the Federal Liberal candidate for the seat of Goldstein and a former member for Goldstein and former minister.
One of the main talking points recently has been about economy and stuff like that. Like some people are saying, GDP is not going to be better. They're going to be surpluses, deficits, stuff like that.
So you've got to separate out all of the different parts.
Yeah.
There's the budget, which is the government's, the money that taxpayers paid the federal government to manage the affairs of the nation. And what we know is that it's in a structural imbalance. The predicted outgoings are higher than the tax revenue that is being taken in, which means you have to get debt. What it means when you get debt is you're borrowing from tomorrow to fund today. So your generation will end up carrying the cost of that debt because debt today is tomorrow's taxes. We need to get that back under control. That's really important, and it's been since the end of 2007. It's progressively gotten worse. We've had some significant events, COVID obviously being one of them, but it's actually got worse under this government when there has been no crisis. So we're very focused on that.
So how will they get debt under control?
So you've ultimately got to remove expenditure, and you've actually got to pare back expenditure from the government. Now there's different ways you can do that. If you have more people working, more people then paying taxes, obviously tax revenue goes up, but you also reduce the amount of dependency of government services because people are able to become more independent. We want to make sure that people are as independent as possible, capable of living out their lives as successfully as possible. But then there's what's happening in the broader economy. We have the highest insolvency rates we've had in generations, which means businesses are closing down because they can't sustain themselves. Business needs confidence. How are we going to do that? We're going to invest in making sure we get energy prices down. It's one of the most important things, costs for a lot of businesses, particularly wealth-creating businesses. Fix industrial relations law, where currently it's being dictated by unions in the interests of their members, not actually in a prosperous economic environment. We're going to do all those sorts of things to get costs down. We've had 12 interest rate rises under the current government, which means every time somebody's going to the bank and saying, hey, I want to bet on my future, I want to borrow money, I want to make the opportunity to create a business, create jobs, they're finding it harder and harder and harder, and costs are going up. And all that means is all those costs are passed down. When you hear things like company tax, it's actually a consumer tax. Companies don't pay tax. It all passes down to prices and you pay it. So higher company taxes, higher income taxes, all of these things just push higher costs onto you, which means your standard of living declines, and that's what's happened under this government.
Just to go back to the energy, when you're talking about helping make energy, like the bills go down and stuff like that, how will a Liberal government do that?
So there's multiple ways that we're going to do that. Our policy on energy is to have renewables plus gas plus nuclear power. It's not one or the other, it's all three of them, because you need renewable energy. I mean, for households, people have solar PV on their rooftop, it's very important for them, and there is some room for large-scale renewables like hydroelectric power. That's good, but the volume that you need of energy to get into the market isn't going to be solved solely by renewables. You also need gas, which addresses peaks in period. I don't know how much people know about the energy market. It's extremely complicated, but you need a base load of energy, and then you have peaks at different times a day and different times a year. Summer is a time where you use a lot more energy. Why? Because everyone turns on their air conditioners. Winter, it's the opposite direction because everybody needs heating. So you have these different peaks and troughs and periods in energy markets. We want to make sure there's a good base load of energy, which is nuclear. We want to have good base load of renewables to support the market, but then address peaking. Whereas at the moment, the current government's position is just rely on renewables and have gas as peaking, which means you put more need on gas. Gas is very expensive. You should use it in a limited and targeted way. If you're running your entire electricity grid off gas, you are going to be paying a lot more, and that is the current government's plan.
But a lot of people have been saying, such as the CSIRO and stuff like that, they've been saying that renewables compared to nuclear is much cheaper and better for the economy. What's your thoughts on that?
Again, it comes down to there's different parts of the energy system. There's generation, which is when the power gets created. Then there is the network cost, which is the large transmission network that takes the power from where it's generated to the households or the businesses where it's consumed. Then there's the distribution network, which is the tail end of that. And then you need what's called firming or storage in an energy market, which is to make sure that you have energy when you need it. They use the term dispatchable, but it's so that when you go and flick on the switch, it turns on whether or not there's anything being generated or not. If you just look at generation costs, nobody will argue that the generation costs associated with, say, for instance, solar is cheaper than most other alternatives. But you also have to add in the network costs plus the distribution costs plus of course the cost of storage, because self-evidently solar doesn't generate any power at night. And when you do that, a lot of energy becomes much more comparable, whereas you look at, say for instance, nuclear in comparison to solar, no one is contesting is more expensive, but we'll use the existing transmission networks, we'll use the existing distribution networks, and it doesn't need storage. So you basically take all those costs out. You've got to compare apples and apples, not apples and oranges or apples and bananas. And so that's why only a multi-energy approach to the energy system works. You need baseload. At the moment it's coal. We want to move it to nuclear. At the moment it's coal plus gas plus renewables. The Labor Party wants to move it to, they claim renewables, but it will be renewables plus gas. And currently they're paying coal companies to keep themselves operating because they can't take that out of the system. We have said zero emissions nuclear plus gas plus renewables.
Now to move on to something else. In the previous election, you had the seat of Goldstein, and then you were voted out and Zoe Daniel was voted in. With that sort of thing, because we saw in the last election the independents, or the Teal Independent, come up. What do you think of their new movement and them appearing to take a bunch of seats from the Liberal
I'm not going to shock you, but I'm clearly obviously not a fan. But the Teal as a political movement sells the idea that they are a trustworthy alternative to the major parties. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because they've made a lot of big promises and they haven't honoured them. I'll give you a classic example. Before the last election, my opponent said that she would scrap fossil fuel subsidies. She has voted for $2 billion of new fossil fuel subsidies. So said one thing before an election, done something differently. She said she would support and defend the Jewish community and particularly their safety. Said that before the election, afterwards has not done that. She said she would not advocate for a higher GST and income tax. After the election, she's advocated and voted for higher income taxes and advocated for a higher GST. So I think they played on an understandable cynicism within the community. They harvested votes from a number of different sections of the community to say, hey, we're going to be more trustworthy, we're going to be more reliable. The hard evidence shows that has not been the case. I mean, you just need to look at what was their primary issue they ran on. It was climate change. Okay, during the last period of the last government and when I was minister, emissions went down. That's the only benchmark that matters in climate change. Everything else is immaterial. It's only about how you get emissions down. Since we've had a change of government, since we've had the Teals, emissions have gone up. They've actually changed upward trajectory while we were getting them down. So I think that they were a big promise that they haven't honoured, and I think the electorate has started to figure that out and realise that while they voted with good spirits and good intent, they've been taken for a ride by the Teals. We have...
Because, sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of people think that the Greens and the Teal Independents on the crossbench, a lot of people don't like them because they're run on this they're both bad angle, which in a lot of places isn't always correct. This party will help these people in a certain way, and then they'll just say, oh, but they're not helping these people that we want, so you should vote for us instead.
Well, what the Teals also promised was relevance, that they would dictate the terms of the national political debate and have a significant amount of influence and deliver for the community. They haven't. They promised that, well, they claimed that we were missing out on a lot of funding from Canberra for the community infrastructure. Not only when I was member did we secure the largest grants for Goldstein in the Commonwealth's history. But since the Teal was elected and Labor was elected, we lost $100 million of infrastructure funding.
I've seen you mentioning that on social media.
So there's a lot of big promises that were made, but they haven't been honoured. And if you want to do anything that corrodes public trust in our political system, it's to promise and say one thing before an election and do something afterwards. People say whatever they want about me, but the brutal reality is I am extremely upfront. I tell people what is true, what I'm going to do, and then I go forward and execute it in office. And that's the basis I think people should pitch for public office and let people actually have a genuine choice, not have a choice between a fake and then who can't deliver and somebody who actually tells you the truth, even if sometimes it's challenging to hear. So,
with this upcoming election, what do you think people should focus on when it comes to this government or what a possible Liberal government could look like?
I think people have got to focus on who can actually deliver. The reality is the country's facing big problems, big challenges. We've got problem around cost of living and affordability where people are having to go to the supermarket and put things back on the aisle because they can't afford to check everything out of the trolley. They're slowly paring back their consumption, which means a lot of local small businesses are really struggling. So we've got to address that core issue of inflation. The second thing we've got to do is we've actually got to massively increase housing supply. The cost of housing, if you're still at home, you may not fully experience the cost of rentals continues to go up and the cost of home ownership continues to go up. And we've got to turn that back. Home ownership is one of the most important issues that our country confronts, and it's the difference between whether your generation sees a sense of hope and opportunity for themselves, like previous generations, or they feel like the system's rigged against them. I don't want your generation to ever give up hope. The other important thing is to address the issue of community safety. We've got massive amount of crime in Bayside and Glen Ira that frankly didn't exist only a few years ago, certainly not to this scale of violent home invasions. We've also got the scourge of anti-Semitism. We have the third largest Jewish community in Goldstein, and you have a very large chunk of the electorate who no longer feel safe walking the streets. Now, that isn't just what I want for the community. That isn't the Australia I grew up in, and isn't the Australia I want to hand to the next generation. Added to that is we're seeing a fraying of our social fabric and our sense of national unity. I want Australians to feel, and people locally to feel comfortable and confident, bold and ambitious about their future, and have a sense of hope. And that's what's lacking. And you're only going to get that if you get a government that wants to steer the country in the right direction, build a future where young people feel they have a sense of opportunity and hope about where they can go and what they can achieve, and where people can retire with security and confidence that they currently don't have.
Seems to make a lot of sense to me, at least. What's your favourite movie?
Well, so I've just done a whole bunch of social media reels about
I've been seeing that a little bit, yeah.
I really love the movie Zoolander, if you've ever seen that. It's so hot right now, which if you know the movie, you'll know how much of an absurd joke that is, but it's a great movie.
Who's your favourite musician or band or something along those lines?
So this is a tough one. We have another reel coming up about this, but it's a mixed bag. I quite like different bands. One of my favourite Australian bands is Client Liaison. Still like the old classics like by Elton John, but I also love Mika. Have you ever heard Mika and the Scissor Sisters? What's your favourite movie?
Oh, mine, 12 Angry Men.
I haven't seen it. I know the book though.
Do you like Return of the Jedi? Last Jedi, sorry.
So you've got to remember that for my generation, episode 1 was episode 4, right?
Yeah.
So Star Wars was awesome, Empire was great, Return of the Jedi was great. Then they went to the prequels and they were all a bit, I know you like Phantom Menace, but like, I'll wear it. Then they did the what do you call it, the third trilogy.
The sequel trilogy.
Sequel trilogy. And I wasn't a big fan of the first two. I thought they kind of they mishmashed it up. And they're kind of creating a story. It didn't really make much sense to me. And then I think The Last Jedi kind of half solved it. The problem was that there was no concurrence between The Last Jedi and the two previous ones.
I think one big thing that happened was the directors just fighting with each other, what they want to the story to go.
It didn't work. I mean, I love Rogue One, and I reckon Rogue One's great because it's a great standalone movie, and it leads in perfectly. And that scene at the end with Vader is just amazing. The way that Vader is portrayed as just this brutal Sith Lord in that movie, and his determination is just, it sets him up so well. Because I remember when I first saw episode 4, and the thing is, like, you don't know, you're completely ignorant of all of these people and the context and the story. And then when you saw Vader, I remember reading an article once and it said, as soon as you saw Darth Vader, you knew that he was the bad guy.
He's just like such an imposing figure, like just such a menacing.
But he couldn't be the good guy, right? It was impossible. So he had to be the bad guy, and so it all just flowed from there. But you see the end of Rogue One and you just go, that's the bad guy.
Yeah, they would make him to look imposing and villainous and stuff like that.
I think they're brilliant job.
I think we'll wrap up there.
Right, do you want a book?